Everything has to be paid for. The United States spent approximately $138 billion on private military contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan between 2001 and 2019. For comparison, the entire GDP of Hungary in 2019 was $161 billion. At the peak of operations in 2010, private contractors outnumbered U.S. troops in Afghanistan, 113,000 contractors versus 103,000 soldiers. War had become privatized, and privatization created a business model where peace means bankruptcy. This episode reveals the economics of mercenary warfare, how private military companies profit from conflict, why they create incentives for endless war, and how outsourcing combat creates a perpetual motion machine that can't stop without destroying the industry. The contractor economy. Blackwater, later renamed Z Services and Academy, earned approximately $1.6 billion in State Department contracts between 2004 and 2012, according to Congressional Budget Office analysis. The services provided security for diplomats, convoy protection, facility guarding, personnel training, essential services, but services that only exist when there's conflict to protect against. The average Blackwater contractor in Iraq earned $600 to $1,200 per day. A U.S. soldier earned approximately $150 to $250 per day, including benefits. The contract premium 4 to 5 times military pay. They said contractors would save money by avoiding long-term military obligations. They got costs 4 times higher than using soldiers. But the economics worked for both sides. Contractors got paid dramatically more than military salaries. Companies got profit margins of 15 to 30% on government contracts. The government avoided political costs of military casualties. Dead contractors don't count in official casualty statistics. DynCorp International received $4.1 billion for police training contracts in Iraq. Triple Canopy got $1.5 billion for security services. KBR secured $39.5 billion for logistics and base operations. The total private military industry serving U.S. operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, over 1,900 companies employing peak populations exceeding 100,000 personnel. This wasn't supplemental support. This was industrial-scale privatization of war. The perverse incentive structure. Private military companies face a fundamental economic problem: peace ends revenue. A traditional military exists regardless of conflict. Soldiers get paid in peacetime, bases remain operational, the institution persists. Private military companies only earn when conflicts exist. No conflict means no contracts means no revenue means bankruptcy. This creates structural incentives for a conflict perpetuation. Wagner Group, the Russian PMC, reportedly earned $1 billion annually at its peak, operating in Syria, Libya, Mali, Central African Republic, and Sudan, according to estimates based on leaked documents and investigative journalism. Wagner's business model: provide military services to governments or factions in exchange for direct cash payments, mining concessions, gold, diamonds, oil, shares of state enterprises, control over valuable infrastructure. In Central African Republic, Wagner received gold and diamond mining rights worth an estimated $100 million annually in exchange for protecting the government. In Syria, Wagner received 25% of revenue from oil and gas fields it helped recapture from ISIS, an estimated $200 to $300 million. The economic calculation is straightforward. Wagner profits when conflicts continue and when it controls valuable assets. Stability threatens both revenue streams. If CAR achieved peace, the government wouldn't need Wagner's protection and might revoke mining concessions. If Syria stabilized, oil revenue would return to Syrian control. Wagner's optimal scenario: perpetual low-intensity conflict that justifies continued presence but doesn't threaten the assets being protected. This is the mercenary trap. The company hired to provide security has incentive to ensure insecurity continues at manageable levels. The contract inflation dynamic. Private military contracts create cost escalation mechanisms that don't exist in regular military operations. When the U.S. military needs more troops, it activates reserves or extends deployments. Marginal cost, essentially the soldier's salary, equipment already exists, training already provided. When the U.S. needs more contractors, it must negotiate new contracts at market rates. If demand exceeds supply, which it always does in active war zones, prices increase. Congressional testimony in 2007 revealed that security contractor costs had increased 300% in Iraq between 2003 and 2007. Not because services improved, because companies could charge more in a competitive market with high demand. KBR charged the U.S. military $99 per load of laundry in Iraq, according to Pentagon audits. A commercial laundry service in the U.S. charges approximately $2 and $3 per load. The markup 3,000% to 4,000%. They said market competition would control costs. They got monopolistic pricing in war zones where alternatives don't exist. The Commission on Wartime Contracting estimated in 2011 that waste, fraud, and abuse in contracts totaled $31 to $60 billion in Iraq and Afghanistan. This wasn't inefficiency. This was the logical result of outsourcing war to profit-driven entities operating in environments with limited oversight. The accountability gap. Private contractors operate in a legal gray zone that creates both economic and security problems. Military personnel operate under Uniform Code of Military Justice, clear rules, clear penalties, clear accountability. Contractors operate under civilian law, but war zones often lack functioning civilian legal systems. The result, limited accountability. Between 2005 and 2009, the Justice Department prosecuted approximately 30 contractor cases from Iraq and Afghanistan. During the same period, an estimated 100,000-plus contractors operated in these zones. The most infamous case, Blackwater contractors killed 17 Iraqi civilians in Nisour Square in 2007. The prosecutions took years, involved multiple trials, and resulted in convictions that were later pardoned. For companies, limited accountability means limited legal risk. This reduces one of the major costs of operations: legal liability. Standard military operations include extensive rules of engagement, investigation procedures for civilian casualties, court-martials for violations. Each of these represents costs: time, money, personnel. Contractors often operate under looser restrictions. Less oversight means lower compliance costs, means higher profit margins. The economic incentive is to minimize costly accountability measures while maximizing revenue-generating operations. The dependency creation. Privatizing war creates institutional dependencies that make deprivatization extremely expensive. By 2010, the U.S. military lacked organic capacity to perform many functions contractors handled: food service, laundry, base maintenance, convoy security, interpreter services, equipment maintenance. Rebuilding this capacity would require recruiting and training thousands of additional military personnel, purchasing equipment and infrastructure contractors currently own, establishing supply chains contractors currently manage, developing expertise that transferred to private sector. The Congressional Research Service estimated in 2016 that rebuilding military capacity to replace contractors would cost $50 to $100 billion over 5 to 10 years. This creates lock-in. The military becomes dependent on contractors. Ending contracts means operational incapacity. Continuing contracts means permanent expense. The private sector has effectively captured essential military functions and made itself indispensable. The Wagner evolution. Wagner Group represents the evolution of the private military model, from service provider to independent actor. Traditional PMCs like Blackwater operated on client contracts. Wagner operates on profit-sharing arrangements and asset control. In Libya, Wagner doesn't just protect one faction, it controls oil fields and ports. In Mali, it doesn't just train forces, it takes mining concessions. In Syria, it doesn't just fight ISIS, it secures revenue from recaptured territory. This transforms the company from contractor to stakeholder. Wagner has direct financial interest in conflict outcomes, not just in providing services during conflicts. The Kremlin analyst assessments suggest Wagner earned an estimated $3 to $5 billion total from 2014 to 2023 across all operations. This includes $1 billion from Russian government contracts, $1 to $2 billion from resource extraction rights, $1 to $2 billion from security services to foreign governments. Wagner employed approximately 25,000 to 50,000 fighters at peak. Average cost per fighter, $3,000 to $5,000 monthly, including salaries, equipment, logistics. Annual operating costs, $900 million to $3 billion. Revenue, $3 to $5 billion total over 9 years, averaging $330 to $550 million annually. The profit margins appear thin or negative on pure military operations. The real money comes from resource extraction and asset control enabled by military presence. This creates incentive to maintain presence in resource-rich conflict zones indefinitely. The longer Wagner stays, the more it extracts. Peace means losing access. The Perpetual contract machine. Afghanistan illustrated the Perpetual contract problem. The U.S. spent $88 billion training Afghan security forces between 2002 and 2021, according to the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Approximately 40% of this, $35 billion, went to private contractors. These contractors trained forces, provided equipment, built facilities, maintained operations, essential services, but services that required continuous contracts. When the U.S. withdrew in 2021, these contracts ended. The Afghan forces collapsed not primarily because of military defeat, but because the contractor-dependent logistics, maintenance, and training systems disappeared. The Afghan Air Force had approximately 160 aircraft in 2021. Within months of withdrawal, fewer than 20 remained operational. Why? Contractors maintain them. No contract meant no maintenance. The Afghan forces were built to be contractor-dependent by design. This ensured continuous contracts, but it also ensured collapse when contracts ended. The private sector had built a military that couldn't exist without private sector support, a perfect perpetual revenue machine until the client stopped paying. The market expansion. The private military industry doesn't shrink when wars end, it finds new wars. When U.S. operations in Iraq and Afghanistan wound down, major PMCs shifted focus. DynCorp pivoted to training contracts in Africa and Eastern Europe. Triple Canopy merged with Olive Group and expanded to Asia and Middle East. Academy, former Blackwater, restructured and secured contracts in UAE and Africa. The industry had grown to approximately $200 to $250 billion globally by 2020, according to market research firms tracking the sector. This includes national military contracts, $150 billion, private security for corporations, $40 billion, maritime security, $8 billion, training and consulting, $10 billion, risk management services, $7 billion. The industry needs conflict to justify these expenditures, not necessarily major wars, but instability, piracy, insurgency, terrorism, conditions that create demand for private military services. The economic incentive is clear. Identify emerging conflicts early, establish presence, secure contracts before competitors, and maintain those contracts as long as instability persists. The regulatory capture. Private military companies develop political influence that protects their economic interests. Campaign contributions from defense contractors to U.S. politicians, over $100 million annually, according to Open Secrets data. This includes traditional defense manufacturers and private military companies. The revolving door, senior military officers retire and join PMC boards. Former government officials become PMC executives. This creates networks that facilitate contract awards. Between 2004 and 2008, 80% of retired 3-star and 4-star generals went to work for defense contractors, according to analysis by the Boston Globe. These relationships create bias toward contractor solutions. When the question is, how do we handle this security problem, the answer often becomes hire contractors, because the decision-makers have financial or professional connections to contractor industries. This isn't corruption in the illegal sense. It's structural bias that favors privatization regardless of whether privatization is optimal. The comparative economics. Traditional military, higher upfront costs, lower long-term costs, exists regardless of conflict. Private military, lower upfront costs, higher long-term costs, exists only during conflict. For short-term operations, contractors make economic sense, surge capacity without permanent expansion of military. For long-term operations, contractors become more expensive than military. No economy of scale, profit margins, contract inflation. Iraq and Afghanistan were long-term operations. Using contractors cost dramatically more than using military personnel would have cost. But the political economy worked. Contractors allowed military operations without politically unpopular drafts or force expansions. The economic cost was higher, the political cost was lower. The system trap. Here's the trap. Privatizing war creates industries that need war to survive. These industries employ hundreds of thousands, generate billions in revenue, create political constituencies that support continued military engagement. When conflicts wind down, these constituencies lobby for new engagements, not explicitly, but through advocacy for security assistance, training missions, stability operations, euphemisms for continued military presence that requires continued contracts. The industry doesn't want World War III. It wants perpetual low-intensity conflicts that justify sustained contractor presence without existential risk to core clients. This is the optimal economic scenario for PMCs, forever wars that never escalate enough to threaten the system but never end enough to eliminate the need for private security. The irreversibility. Once military functions privatize, deprivatization becomes economically and operationally prohibitive. The U.S. military would need years and billions to rebuild organic capacity. During transition, operational capacity would degrade. Politically, this is unacceptable. So the contractors remain, the contracts continue, the dependency deepens. Each year of privatization makes the next year of privatization more necessary. The system reinforces itself. The system revelation. War privatization creates a conflict of interest built into the economic structure. The organizations hired to end conflicts profit from conflicts continuing. The companies paid to provide security benefit from insecurity persisting. This doesn't require conspiracy or malice. It's simply economic incentive. Peace is bad for business. Perpetual manageable conflict is optimal. And when the profit motive aligns with military force, the result is a system that tends toward endless war, not because anyone wants it, but because everyone profits from it. Everything has to be paid for, and when war becomes privatized, it gets paid for with conflicts that never end because ending them would bankrupt the industry hired to fight them. Subscribe to The Price of Conflict to understand how outsourcing war creates perpetual war.